In 1680, deep under the dry desert of Southern California, the southern part of the San Andreas Fault moved for the last time. Then, it went quiet. And that quiet has lasted for 346 years. But quiet does not mean safe. That is the part people forget. Under the ground, the plates never stopped moving. They kept pushing past each other, year after year, almost 2 inches at a time, slowly, silently, patiently. And now, all that locked-up movement has built into something hard to picture. About 20 feet of stored slip. That is roughly the height of a 2-story house. Not sitting in the air, not on a chart, but trapped inside the rock beneath California. When that energy finally breaks loose, Los Angeles may not just shake for a few seconds and move on. Water lines could snap, gas lines could rupture. Fires could start in places firefighters cannot even reach. Some estimates say parts of Los Angeles could be without restored water service for months. And here is the part that should make anyone stop and think. Millions of people live above this fault today. Homes, schools, hospitals, freeways, pipelines, entire neighborhoods, all sitting over a line in the earth that has been locked for centuries. So the real question is not, will it happen? The real question is, how much longer can silence be mistaken for safety? The San Andreas Fault is not just a crack in the ground somewhere out in the desert. It is an 800-mile break running through California, from the Salton Sea all the way up toward Cape Mendocino. And on both sides of that break, 2 massive tectonic plates are slowly sliding past each other. One side is part of the Pacific Plate. The other side is part of the North American Plate. They do not move fast enough for us to notice while we are standing there. But they move. Every year, almost 2 inches. That may not sound like much. 2 inches feels small. It is less than the width of your hand. But give it enough time, and small movement becomes something serious. Over decades, it becomes feet. Over centuries, it becomes the kind of pressure that can tear roads, pipelines, and riverbeds apart. That is what makes San Andreas so dangerous. The ground is not frozen. It only feels that way to us. We drive over it, build homes on it, lay water lines across it, put freeways, schools, and cities right near it. But deep below the surface, the plates are still grinding. They are still pushing. They are still storing energy. We do not feel it every morning when we wake up. We do not hear it when we go to work. But that does not mean nothing is happening. It only means the movement is quiet enough for people to forget it is there. The San Andreas Fault is not one simple line that breaks all at once every time. It has sections, and each section has its own history. Almost like 3 clocks ticking under California. The southern section is the most unsettling one. It last had a major rupture around 1680. That means it has been quiet for more than 3 centuries. But again, quiet is not the same as calm. During all those years, the plates kept moving, the pressure kept building, the clock kept ticking. The central section spoke later. In 1857, it ripped open during the Fort Tejon earthquake. The ground tore for more than 200 miles in about a minute and a half. Back then, very few people lived along that stretch. So the death toll was low, but the energy was real. If that same kind of rupture happened today, it would be a completely different story. Then there is the northern section. It broke in 1906, and San Francisco paid the price. The shaking was bad, but the fires afterward were worse. The city burned for days, and thousands died. So when people ask, why worry now? This is the reason. The fault has already shown what it can do. South, center, north. Each section has moved before. Each one is part of the same larger system. No one can say the exact day the next clock runs out. But the longer a section stays locked, the more energy it stores. And the southern section has been silent the longest. On the morning of the 9th of January, 1857, California had no idea what was about to happen. It was 8:24 in the morning, near Fort Tejon. The air was dry. Soldiers were getting ready for breakfast. Out across the Carrizo Plain, there was almost nothing but open land, sheep, dust, and one rider on a horse. Then, the ground started to move. But it did not begin like people imagine earthquakes begin. It did not just snap and shake all at once. At first, it rolled. Witnesses miles apart later described a low, deep rumble moving through the land, like a freight train running underground. Then, the fault opened. In about 90 seconds, the rupture tore through roughly 220 miles of California. Think about that for a second. 220 miles of ground shifting in the time it takes to brush your teeth. In the Carrizo Plain, a creek bed slid sideways right in front of a rider. The horse refused to cross. Streams changed direction for a short time. Trees twisted and broke. The land did not just shake, it moved. At Fort Tejon, adobe buildings collapsed. Walls fell outward. Men were trapped under debris. Captain Edward Beale survived because he was inside a wooden building, not one of the heavy adobe structures. Afterward, he spent hours pulling people out. And yet, the official death toll was only one. That number can fool people. One death sounds small. It makes the earthquake seem almost mild. But that is not what happened. The earthquake was not weak. The land was empty. At that time, very few people lived along the rupture zone. California itself had a much smaller population. The places that would now be towns, suburbs, highways, and neighborhoods were mostly open country. So the lesson from 1857 is not that San Andreas was gentle. It was not. The lesson is that timing saved California from a disaster it could barely imagine. The same energy released today would not be remembered as a footnote in a geology book. It would be remembered as a national tragedy. The reason the 1857 earthquake did not kill thousands of people is painfully simple. Almost nobody was in the way. Back then, the area near the rupture line was mostly empty. Small settlements, open ranch land, a few buildings, a few roads, not much else. Los Angeles was still a small town with fewer than 5,000 people. The fault had room to move without tearing through the kind of world we have built today. That is no longer true. Today, that same line runs near places like Palmdale, Wrightwood, San Bernardino, and Lake Hughes. These are not empty dots on a map anymore. They are communities, homes, schools, power lines, water systems, freeways, hospitals, places where people wake up, drive to work, take their kids to school, and assume the ground under them will stay where it is. And it is not just the people living directly on the fault. Millions more live within the wider shaking zone. A rupture on the same scale as 1857 would send waves through Southern California in a way the old California never had to face. That is what makes this so uncomfortable. The fault has not changed its basic nature. The physics are the same. The plates still move. The pressure still builds. The ground can still tear open like it did before. What changed is us. We built cities across the danger zone. We laid pipelines across it. We ran freeways over it. We placed modern life directly on top of an old wound in the earth. Same energy, same fault, same kind of rupture. But today, the consequences would not be the same at all. To understand why scientists take the San Andreas Fault so seriously, you have to go to a quiet place called Pallet Creek. It is not dramatic at first glance. It is not some giant canyon with fire and smoke coming out of the ground. It is just a shallow creek in the Mojave Desert, about 80 miles north of Los Angeles. Brown water, mud, willows, dirt banks. The kind of place most people would drive past without thinking twice. But for one young geologist, that creek became a kind of history book. In 1975, Carrie C., a graduate student at Caltech, started digging trenches across the creek bed. He was only 25 years old. What he wanted to find was not gold, fossils, or buried ruins. He was looking for old earthquakes. And that sounds strange until you understand how the ground keeps records. When a fault ruptures, the layers of soil shift. Mud, peat, and old plant material get cut and moved. New layers form on top. Over time, each big earthquake leaves a mark, almost like a scar inside the earth. If you know how to read those scars, you can start to see when the fault moved in the past. C spent 13 years doing that work. Not glamorous work, not fast work. He dug by hand. He brushed dirt away carefully. He photographed layers. He collected carbon samples. He studied every small line in the trench wall like it mattered, because it did. And slowly, the pattern appeared. By the late 1980s, he had identified 10 major ruptures of the San Andreas Fault, going back more than 1,000 years. The layers showed that the fault had broken again and again. Not randomly, in the way most people imagine, but in a pattern scientists could actually study. That is the part that matters. The history of earthquakes does not disappear just because people were not there to film it. The land remembers. The mud remembers. The peat remembers. Every rupture leaves evidence behind. And at Pallet Creek, those quiet layers of dirt told a disturbing story. The San Andreas Fault has moved many times before, and the next major rupture is not some wild movie idea. It is part of a long record already written under California's feet. There is one number that keeps coming back with the southern San Andreas Fault: 20 feet. At first, that may sound like just another science number, something for a report, something for a chart. But it is not just a number, it is a warning. That 20 feet is the amount of movement that has been building up between the two sides of the fault since the last major rupture. The plates have kept moving, but the fault has stayed locked. So the motion does not disappear. It piles up, year after year, inch after inch. And when that locked section finally gives way, the ground does not simply shake in place. It can slide sideways. That is the part many people do not picture. A big San Andreas earthquake is not only about buildings swaying, it is about the land itself shifting, one side of California moving past the other in a matter of seconds. If a house sits directly on that fault line, the danger is not just collapse. The ground under one side of the house could move away from the ground under the other side. Roads can be cut, water pipes can snap, gas lines can tear, fiber optic cables can be severed. Airport runways, if they cross the trace, can be broken in the same instant. 20 feet is not abstract when you imagine a street suddenly split apart. It is not abstract when you imagine a water line pulled until it breaks. It is not abstract when you imagine emergency crews trying to reach people. But the roads they need are no longer connected. That is why scientists pay so much attention to slip deficit. It tells us how much motion is waiting in the rock. And on the southern San Andreas, that number has become very hard to ignore. In 2008, the United States Geological Survey did something important. They did not try to scare people with a movie-style disaster story. They built a scenario, a serious one, a detailed one, a 308-page report about what a major earthquake on the southern San Andreas could actually do to Southern California. The project was called Shakeout. The lead scientist was Lucy Jones, a seismologist who had spent decades studying this fault. And she was not working alone. Around 300 scientists, engineers, and emergency planners were brought together to answer one simple question. What happens if a magnitude 7.8 earthquake hits the southern San Andreas? Not in a vague way, not there will be damage. They looked at it minute by minute, system by system. What breaks first? What fails next? How do fires spread? What happens to water? What happens to roads, hospitals, ports, and rescue crews? That is what makes Shakeout so serious. It was not a prophecy. It did not claim to know the exact day or year. Earthquakes do not work like that. But it used the fault, the ground, the infrastructure, and the science that already existed. In other words, this was not guessing. It was modeling, and the conclusion was uncomfortable. The question was not whether Southern California could face this kind of event. The question was how prepared it would be when it happened. That difference matters, because when officials say an earthquake cannot be predicted, some people hear, then maybe it will not happen. But that is not what scientists mean. They mean the exact date is unknown. The risk itself is not unknown. Shakeout took that risk and put it on paper. Gas lines, water lines, freeways, fires, hospitals, millions of people. It showed that the big one is not just a shaking problem, it is a systems problem. And once you see it that way, the whole thing feels much more real. In the Shakeout scenario, it starts at 10 in the morning on a Thursday, not at night, not in some empty desert where nobody is paying attention. A normal weekday morning. People are at work, kids are in school, trucks are on the freeway, hospitals are full, restaurants are open. Southern California is already moving through the day. Then the rupture begins near Bombay Beach, by the Salton Sea. At first, most people do not understand what is happening. Maybe a low sound comes first. Maybe the floor gives a small jolt. Maybe lights flicker. But under the ground, the fault has already started tearing northwest. And it is moving fast, about 2 miles every second. In less than half a minute, the rupture is racing through the desert. The ground is not just shaking, it is breaking open along the fault. One side is sliding past the other, releasing energy that has been locked away for centuries. By around 90 seconds, the rupture reaches San Bernardino. Think about that. A major city can go from normal life to disaster conditions in a minute and a half. Roads crack, power lines fail, gas lines tear. People are still trying to figure out if they should run, duck, call family, or get out of a building. But the earthquake is not done. The rupture keeps moving northwest. The waves spread into the basin. Soft ground can make the shaking last longer. Buildings begin reacting in different ways. Some sway, some crack, some hold, some do not. By about 2 minutes, the shaking reaches the outskirts of Los Angeles. That is the terrifying part. Los Angeles does not need to sit directly on the starting point to be hit hard. The energy travels, the basin catches it, the city feels it, and in those first 2 minutes, everything changes. Emergency lines flood, elevators stop, freeways lock up, water mains break, fires begin. Hospitals start receiving injuries before anyone fully understands the scale of what just happened. This is why the first 90 seconds matter so much. They are not just the start of an earthquake. They are the moment Southern California crosses from ordinary life into a crisis that could last for months. The first major problem may not be a collapsed building. It may be gas. In the shakeout scenario, hundreds of natural gas pipelines rupture across the region. The ground moves, pipes bend, some snap, some tear open underground. And once gas starts leaking, it does not need much to turn into fire. A broken power line can do it. A water heater can do it. A stove in a restaurant kitchen can do it. One spark in the wrong place is enough. Within minutes, fires start breaking out across Southern California. Not one fire, not 10. The scenario talks about around 1,600 fires burning at the same time. That number is hard to even picture. People sometimes imagine firefighters rushing in, sirens on, handling one emergency after another. But this would not be one emergency. It would be hundreds and hundreds of emergencies, all happening at once. And the firefighters would not be the problem. Their courage would not be the problem. Their training would not be the problem. The scale would be the problem. Streets may be blocked. Buildings may be damaged. Hydrants may not work. Radio systems may be overloaded. Crews may be trapped on the wrong side of broken roads. And every minute matters when fire is moving through neighborhoods. That is what makes this part so frightening. The earthquake itself is only the first hit. The fires come next. And in a place like Southern California, with dry air, wind, packed neighborhoods, and broken infrastructure, fire can become its own disaster. So, when people talk about the big one, they are not just talking about shaking. They are talking about what breaks after the shaking starts. And gas is one of the first systems that could turn damage into chaos. After gas, the next problem may be even more terrifying: water. Los Angeles depends on water that comes from far away. 3 major aqueducts help supply the region: the Colorado River Aqueduct, the California Aqueduct, and the Los Angeles Aqueduct. And all 3 cross the San Andreas Fault. That is the part people do not think about. Water does not just appear because you turn a faucet. It travels through long systems: pipes, canals, pumps, tunnels, crossings. And if the ground shifts hard enough at the fault, those systems can break in the first minute. In the shakeout scenario, all 3 aqueducts fail where they cross the fault. Now think about what that means. Not just less water, not just low pressure, a real cutoff. At first, there may be some reserves, enough for a short time, maybe enough for essential use for a couple of days. But after that, millions of people, are depending on whatever remains in the system. And this is where the disaster becomes painfully practical. People need water to drink. Hospitals need water to operate. Firefighters need water to fight fires. Families need water to cook, clean, flush toilets, wash wounds, and stay alive in hot weather. Now imagine fires burning while hydrants lose pressure. Imagine hospitals taking in the injured while water service is failing. Imagine neighborhoods waiting for repairs, but crews cannot reach the broken sections because roads and bridges are damaged too. That is why the water failure feels so real. It is not dramatic in a movie way. It is worse than that. It is everyday life suddenly becoming impossible. The shakeout estimate says restored water service could take months in some places, and that assumes repair crews can get to the breaks. The shaking may last minutes, but the water crisis could last far longer. Then comes the third problem, movement. Not the fault movement this time, human movement. After a major San Andreas rupture, getting from one place to another could become a nightmare. Some of the most important transportation routes in Southern California cross or run close to the fault. Interstate 5, Interstate 15, State Route 14. These are not small back roads. These are lifelines. People use them to get to work. Emergency crews use them to reach damaged areas. Trucks use them to move food, fuel, medicine, and supplies. But when the ground shifts, bridges can drop, overpasses can fail, pavement can split. One broken crossing can block thousands of people. Several broken crossings can freeze an entire region. And it does not stop with roads. The ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles are some of the most important ports in the country. A huge amount of goods moves through them, but rail lines connected to those ports also depend on routes that can be damaged by a major quake. So this is not only a California problem. If the ports slow down, if rail lines stop, if freeways are blocked, the impact spreads far beyond Los Angeles. Stores in other states can feel it. Warehouses can feel it. Supply chains can feel it. That is what makes the big one different from the kind of disaster people imagine. It is not just buildings shaking. It is the system underneath daily life breaking apart. Roads, bridges, rail, ports, trucks, deliveries, all connected. And when one part fails, the whole country may feel the delay. Here is the part that makes the shakeout scenario even more uncomfortable. The main scenario uses a magnitude 7.8 earthquake on the southern San Andreas Fault. That is already serious. More than serious. It is the kind of event that can overwhelm cities, damage lifelines, start fires, cut water, and change life across Southern California for months. But according to the video, that may not even be the worst version. There is a difficult section near the San Gorgonio Pass. It is not a simple straight line. It is more like a geological knot, where different faults meet and interact. The San Andreas does not exist alone there. Other faults are part of the system too. And if a rupture starts near the Salton Sea, then pushes through that San Gorgonio area and connects into the central section, the event could become much larger. The magnitude could rise to 8.2. That sounds like a small jump if you just look at the number. From 7.8 to 8.2. But earthquakes do not scale in a simple way. In this case, the released energy could be about 10 times greater than the 7.8 scenario. 10 times. That is not a detail you can brush aside. More energy means stronger effects over a wider area. It can mean longer shaking, more damaged buildings, more broken roads, more failed systems, more problems happening at the same time. And the most unsettling part is this. The 7.8 shakeout scenario was already described as conservative. So when people hear the big one, they should not picture one fixed event with one neat outcome. The real question is how far the rupture goes once it starts. Because if it jumps through the wrong place, Southern California may face something even bigger than the scenario most people have heard. In 1906, the northern section of the San Andreas Fault gave California a lesson it should never have forgotten. San Francisco shook for less than a minute, about 48 seconds. That sounds short until you think about what can happen in that amount of time. Walls crack, streets split, gas lines break, people are thrown out of bed, buildings that looked solid the day before suddenly are not. But the shaking was only the beginning. After the earthquake, fire took over. San Francisco burned for days. The city was not just damaged by the ground moving. It was consumed by what failed afterward. Broken gas lines, damaged water systems, streets blocked by debris, fire crews trying to fight flames in a city that had already been knocked off balance. Around 3,000 people died. That is the part people need to remember when they talk about the San Andreas Fault. The earthquake is not always the only killer. Sometimes it is just the first push. After that comes the chain reaction. Fire, water failure, blocked roads, overwhelmed hospitals, delayed rescue, people trapped where help cannot reach them fast enough. That is why 1906 still matters. It showed that a San Andreas disaster is not one clean event. It is a domino effect. The ground moves first. Then everything built on top of it gets tested. For many people in California, the Northridge earthquake is what a big earthquake feels like. And that makes sense. It happened in 1994. It hit the San Fernando Valley. It was violent, sudden, and terrifying. It lasted about 20 seconds. Buildings were damaged, freeways broke, people died. The economic damage was massive. But here is the important part. Northridge was not a San Andreas earthquake. It came from a smaller, hidden thrust fault under the valley. Its magnitude was 6.7. That is still powerful. No one should pretend it was small. It killed 57 people and caused tens of billions of dollars in damage. But compared to what the southern San Andreas can do, Northridge is not the full picture. That is the danger of memory. People judge the future by the worst thing they have personally seen. So if Northridge is the biggest earthquake someone remembers, they may think, okay, that was terrible, but we survived it. The problem is, the southern San Andreas is a different kind of threat. It could release far more energy. It could rupture for hundreds of miles. The shaking could last much longer. The damage would not be limited to one valley or one part of the city. It could hit roads, water, gas, power, hospitals, and supply lines across a much wider region. So Northridge should not make California feel prepared. It should make California ask a harder question. If a smaller fault caused that much damage in 20 seconds, what happens when the real San Andreas finally moves? The scary part is not that nobody knows about the San Andreas Fault. They do know. Scientists know. Engineers know. Emergency planners know. The maps exist. The reports exist. The weak spots have been named. The dangerous buildings have been listed. The pipelines, freeways, aqueducts, and fault crossings are not hidden. They are right there in the data. So this is not a mystery movie where people are shocked because nature fooled them. That is not the real problem. The real problem is delay. Some buildings have been strengthened. Some systems have been improved. Some plans have been written, but not enough, not fast enough. And not everywhere it matters. That is what makes this so frustrating. Because when the ground finally moves, people will not be able to say, "We had no idea." They will only be able to say, "We thought we had more time." And that is a dangerous way to live with a fault like this. The plates do not care about budgets. They do not care about politics. They do not care that a retrofit is too expensive, or that a city has other problems, or that people are tired of hearing earthquake warnings. The fault keeps moving anyway. Every quiet year makes it easier for people to relax. But underground, nothing has stopped. The pressure keeps building. The risk keeps waiting. So the issue is not that nature is too mysterious. The issue is that humans are very good at postponing what they do not want to face. And San Andreas is exactly the kind of problem that punishes delay. Science can tell us a lot about the San Andreas Fault. It can tell us where the fault runs. It can tell us how fast the plates move. It can tell us how much slip has built up. It can show us old ruptures preserved in mud, peat, and broken layers of earth. It can tell us that this fault has moved before, and it will move again. But there is one thing science cannot give us: the exact year. And that blank space is where people get comfortable. Because if nobody can say, "It will happen on this date," then daily life takes over. People go to work. Kids go to school. Homes get bought. Freeways stay crowded. Pipes stay buried. Old buildings stay standing. The danger starts to feel distant. But not knowing the date does not make the danger smaller. That is the mistake. If a doctor tells you a serious problem is building inside your body, you do not ignore it just because they cannot name the exact day it becomes critical. You prepare. You change something. You take it seriously. The San Andreas Fault is the same kind of warning, just written in rock instead of blood work. The cycle is known. The history is known. The motion is measured. The only missing number is the date. So here is the question that really matters. If we do not know the day it happens, does that make it less dangerous? Or does it mean we should have started preparing a long time ago? The biggest lesson from the San Andreas Fault is not complicated. Most major disasters do not come from things nobody saw coming. They often come from things people knew about, talked about, studied, and then pushed to the side. That is what makes this so hard to accept. The fault is mapped. The history is known. The past ruptures have been counted. The weak points in the system have been studied. Scientists have warned about the slip building up. Engineers have looked at the buildings, the roads, the pipelines, and the aqueducts. So, the problem is not ignorance. The problem is delay. And delay feels harmless while nothing is happening. That is the trap. Every calm year makes people feel safer. Every decade without disaster makes the warning sound less urgent. People get used to the quiet. Leaders move on. Budgets go somewhere else. Old buildings stay old. Pipes stay buried. Bridges stay vulnerable. Then one day, the ground moves, and everyone asks why more was not done sooner. That is the painful pattern. Humans often believe in disaster only after it has already happened. Before that, it feels too expensive, too unlikely, too far away. San Andreas is a reminder that nature does not need our attention to keep working. The plates keep moving, the pressure keeps building, and every warning ignored becomes more expensive with time. There are 3 dates that tell the story: 1680, 1681, 1682. In 1680, the southern section of the San Andreas Fault moved, then went silent. Since then, centuries have passed. Cities were built, roads were paved, water systems were stretched across the desert. Millions of people arrived, but under all of it, the fault kept waiting. In 1857, the central section tore open near Fort Tejon. The ground ripped for more than 200 miles. It could have been a national tragedy, but California was still mostly empty along that line. The energy was enormous. The losses were not. In 1906, the northern section struck San Francisco. The shaking lasted less than a minute, but the fire that followed burned the lesson into American history. Thousands died. A city learned what happens when the ground moves and the systems above it fail. 3 dates, 3 warnings, 3 reminders that San Andreas is not sleeping forever. And now, the 4th date has not been written yet. That is the part that hangs over California. No scientist can circle the day on a calendar. No one can say whether it comes in a year, a decade, or later than that. But the fault does not need a human schedule. It has its own rhythm, its own pressure, its own long memory. The silence is still there, but it is not empty. It is filled with motion that has not been released yet. So the question is not whether the big one will come. That is not the real question anymore. The question is what California will look like when the silence finally ends, and whether, by then, it will have prepared enough. So now, I want to ask you something. Do you think California is truly prepared for the big one? Not prepared on paper. Not prepared in a report sitting on a shelf. I mean, prepared in real life. Prepared in the buildings people live in. Prepared in the water lines people depend on. Prepared in the freeways, hospitals, gas systems, emergency plans, and neighborhoods that would have to survive the first few minutes and then the months after. Because that is the part people do not always think about. A major earthquake is not over when the shaking stops. For many families, that may be when the real crisis begins. If this story made you see the San Andreas Fault differently, leave a comment below. Tell me what surprised you the most. Do you think California is doing enough, or are we still treating silence like safety? And if you want more stories like this, geological disasters, forgotten history, and hard lessons from nature, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There are many more stories the textbooks barely mention, and some of them are closer than we think.